This is Brent Rains for Alternate Perceptions. Once again, it's uh, Wednesday morning at about it's December the 14th, 2022, and it's part five with Mr. Peter Jordan up there in New Jersey. And we're going to be discussing synchronicities with the number 23 and cattle mutilations. And hopefully we can get all that rounded out. Of course, we can always do another a part six too. I
Yeah,
guess. Yeah. So
why not?
let's see where we let's see where we get to, Peter. Good to talk with you again.
Okay. Oh, great talking with you again too. And yeah, and I wanted to say it was nice. You had forwarded me a. This was when I did the first uh, interview with you, and I think it was somebody from. I want to say from Sweden. Um, you had forwarded me a email
Hmm.
that you had received about me, and it linked to a YouTube video in which he held up an article I had written for 14 Times about my research into cattle mutilations. And I was just surprised that anybody even
Oh,
remembered that
oh,
at
well, that
all.
actually that was
And
somebody from Germany. Yeah,
oh, Germany, I'm sorry. Okay.
yeah,
Yeah, and I thought that was really nice, and it was just I was rather surprised by it because I thought, wow, somebody
yeah,
else actually saw that.
yeah,
Okay,
and he talked about the guy that sent it to me. He talked about how some of his friends are interested in all this material
that's
from years
great.
ago, and so they knew you.
That's
uh,
great. That's
yeah,
great.
it's good to know that there are people still out there. And of course, my interview with Barbara Fisher recently up in Athens, Ohio, who is reading a lot of the old material as well and taking an interest in all of these uh, earlier accounts.
Yeah, and a splendid researcher she is. She also mentioned someone else that I um, I always was very very impressed with, and she doesn't get a lot of notice. Um, but I knew of her through Eugenia Macer's story. There's a name,
Hmm.
Eugenia
Hmm.
Macer's story. So actually, I met Eugenia through Dr. Schwartz.
Hmm.
Was another person that he recommended to me, and Eugenia was a very interesting, brilliant artist, um, graduate of Yale University. She uh, had very eclectic interests in the paranormal, pretty
Oh,
much the entire spectrum of it.
you sure
Wrote
did.
some very interesting books, and many of those books long out of print. Some of them were too arcane, I think, for most people to digest at the time.
Hmm.
But I found her fascinating. We were good friends at the time. We did some researching together. Um, we shared a lot of paranoid reactions to certain things at the time. I remember. Uh, but she was really, really an amazing person. And what I wanted to say about her was Jacques Vallée, in one of the um, Forbidden Sciences books that he wrote, his journals,
Hmm.
uh,
Yeah.
mentions her at length about how he met her, and he thought she was actually one of the most interesting people he had met. Uh, and I thought, wow, that's amazing that he's talking about her because most people, she was fairly obscure to most people, unless you were in these esoteric circles that she was in, especially in the dramatic arts or in, so she did a lot of stage plays. She wrote stage plays, et cetera, et cetera. She was very close friends with Professor Wham, who wrote a wonderful book that Barbara Fisher recommended called
Hmm.
Mysterious Beauty about the Hudson Valley case. And Professor Wham is someone I I have heard on various podcasts and so forth and so on, and I always really enjoy what she has to say. Very, very erudite, very insightful, um, and very interested in Fortean phenomenon. Fascinating person. If you ever have an opportunity to talk with her and do an
Yeah.
interview, you really should, because she has a lot of associations with people that you would know and that I know, and especially she's very an expert. I would call her an expert on the Hudson Valley in general,
Yeah.
and about the mysterious mounds and all of the electromagnetic stuff up there, and also all of the things that were going on during the Hudson Wave. She was involved in those investigations. Um, Somebody I would recommend to you.
Yeah. I'd had some contact with her in the past, but
Okay.
I hadn't really gone, because she had an experience as a young girl, um, very young, over in Chattanooga, over here in Tennessee, and of seeing, I think, a flying disc, as I recall. So I was, inquiring
She's
about.
had many very interesting experiences.
Yeah.
She also had a startling and disturbing encounter with somebody who was a serial killer.
Oh, wow.
And I'll leave it at that. And she's written about it on her blog and elsewhere. And I've heard her speak about it. It's actually one of them. It's absolutely frightening to think that the person she was working for was actually a serial killer, but he was. Um, if you ever get a chance, she's well worth talking to and introducing her to a lot of people that I think who do not know her, because she's not somebody who goes out of her way to publicize. You know,
Right.
she just quietly does her own research. I like people like that sometimes. You know, they're more
Wow.
about the research.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's just fascinating that Jacques Valley, of all people, would find that other lady of such interest. I mean, when you consider all the people from all over the world who he has investigated in all the high strangeness, situations,
Yeah, usually Valet
you know,
other than Hynek and a few others, he's not somebody who lavishes praise on people like that. And that's why it stood out to me. But having known Eugenia, I knew exactly what he meant. He appreciated many of the qualities that I appreciated in her as well, you know.
right.
But anyway, so didn't want to get off on a tangent there, but
It's
just
interesting.
wanted to say that it is interesting. All of it's interesting. And,
Absolutely.
especially, and what happens with you, darn it, is you mention something and it triggers a memory of someone else
Sorry
that
about that.
I'm recollecting. No, these are nice
I know.
recollections, but it's just nice to, uh, to bring these names up, because some people may say, "Hey, I'm going to look that name up." Unfortunately, a lot of these books have never been reprinted, and I think that was something Fisher was, um, you know, said with regret that so many of these, like UFO Dynamics,
Hmm.
Schwartz's books, haven't been reprinted, and it's really sad because there's so much other junk, unfortunately, that litters the shelves at Amazon. And you say, wow, there's so much other stuff that would be much better.
And when you find some of the old books that are on Amazon or somewhere online, and you would like to get it, it's from the 60s or the 50s. It's got a huge price tag because it's such a rare edition.
Yeah, fortunately, and I want to point this out again. This is said more as just an educational tip for some that aren't aware of an Internet Archive. If you go on the Internet Archive, which is totally free, you look under books for loan or books that are available. Very often you can find. I found Linda Howe's book on the cattle mutilations, on glimpses, available on loan for free on the Internet Archive. I
Hmm.
have found so many books that people said, I can't find this book. I have to pay $200 for it on eBay or whatever. That's not always the case. That's true for some of them, but for a lot of them, people put them up on the Internet Archive for researchers. And it's the same thing with audio files. If you want to find all of Wendy Connor's old audio archives, when Bob Gribble was taking those phone calls for uh, for what was it, the National UFO
UFO
Newfork?
Reporting Center.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, they're all there. They're all there for download on the Internet Archive. I've downloaded them all and I've played them all. So when people say I can't find things, maybe they're not sure where to go or how to dig in. There's a lot more available now. Um, there's also some other sites that I won't mention here that are available that aren't necessarily, you know, something that most people would use, where I have found books that have been uploaded, that I've been able to download that were old books that you can't find pretty much anywhere. So a lot of times when I'm researching, I'll look at all these different sources that are online, you know, and even from time to time, yes, you know, on Pirate Bay or one of those torrent sites, because sometimes that's the only place you can find it, you know,
Wow. Yeah.
without paying a couple $100. So anyway, but so that's anyway, that was that's what I wanted to say, and now I
Okay.
won't say any further because
Oh,
we'll get
well,
off
hey,
topic again.
well, it's good to get off topic some, and I appreciate all these various off topic things because they're really on topic, even though they're slightly off topic. You know,
You know
it's
what,
all really.
Kevin Randall, one of the things I've always liked about Kevin Randall, on his blog, on
Mhm.
UFOs, will often talk about, he calls it chasing the footnotes. And he said, and it's a research term. It means what you do is you really are, I drool over footnotes. It's a crazy thing. I know. Call me a nerd, call me academic. I'm old school. What what I was raised with is you read an article that's published somewhere and there's one, two, three, four, five, six footnotes showing sources. What
Mhm.
drives me crazy, I don't know about you, is I'm reading something I'm really intrigued by and somebody makes a comment about something. It's just a sentence and there's no footnote and it's something very important or it's controversial, or they'll say it's been reported that this has happened, or statistically this, all I keep thinking is, where are the footnotes? Where are the footnotes? That's why Bert Schwartz,
Mhm.
being an academic, you know, and a psychiatrist, he wrote things as if he was writing for an actual journal in which there's tons of footnotes. And if you dig just into the footnotes, you can learn more from the footnotes sometimes from the actual piece you're reading.
Mhm. Yeah.
So that's something that I feel you don't see it a lot, you know, or indexes. Like I know sometimes people have to pay to have an index compiled now if you're publishing a book on Amazon, but what's the point? You're writing all this stuff. I go to the back of the book and I say, what are the sources for all this? What are the books that we're talking about here
Yeah.
that we're referencing, so that researchers can go back and, if they want to, try to find those books and actually confirm that that was the original source or not. What has happened to that art, right? So that to me is, you know, critical. And a lot of the older books, the books that you and I, for example, digested, and many people digested back in the day, they were loaded with footnotes, you know, whether it was the Lorenzens or whoever was writing. I mean, you just knew, you got to the end of the book, you'd say, let me see which books I don't own, right? You'd say, oh, look at that. Oh, I didn't know Keel wrote that book, or, you know, I'm just using that as an example, or I didn't know that there was a book written about this particular subject, this particular case. But
Yeah.
it's always good to have that so you can cross check it and sort of to try to fill in the gaps as much as you possibly can, you know?
Yeah. I remember Flying Saucer Review, the some of the footnotes in there, and I remember particularly the Beyond Condon edition back in I guess 1971 or 72.
Uh-huh.
And Keel wrote several articles, and then articles by other authors. He was writing a lot of footnotes in that edition,
Oh, okay. I didn't see
and
that. Okay.
and it was quite interesting to read his footnotes on all these different things, you know.
Yeah.
Uh, and and even in the I remember one there in uh, up in upper state New York where there was even a mysterious death of a young teenage boy, and
Hmm.
there were these investigators, a husband and wife team, and there was they were seeing UFOs, and then there was poltergeist activity and strange phone calls, and then the husband met an MIB type guy who warned him, you know, off of their investigations,
Hmm.
and she drew a sketch, and then Keel mentions that in his footnote that he had one of the sketches, a copy as well, and the one that they had, the house was broken into, and the only thing taken, I think, was the sketch. And
Oh, wow.
the husband died about 2 months after his encounter with the MIB. And
Wow.
you know, those footnotes tell things that quite interesting and
Oh,
so
absolutely. I mean, when I was working on the Menger case, um, Schwartz's articles that he published in UFO Dynamics there were there was a plethora of
mm,
wonderful footnotes about a lot of the people that invest and and I was able to tease out certain things that he was disguising because I already knew certain things and maybe other people didn't know, and so it really helped me on the research end of it. And the same thing happens when you have somebody like, let's say, Raymond Keller, of all people, publishes all this stuff from Augie Roberts and his visits to the Menger farm and so forth and so on. And there is all of Roberts's handwritten notes
yeah.
detailing his
Mhm.
encounters and what happened there. And it's as if it opened up a different window to something I was looking for. It's just important. I think a lot of people feel if they're doing research, oh, no one's going to be interested in taking this any further. It's just for me. But it isn't just for you, it's for other people. That's why publishing is important, you know? Yeah,
Yeah.
podcasts are fun and they're good. I'm not saying it's good, but more important is what you're writing. What are you writing? What are you saying? You
Hmm.
know, like someone like yourself, you've written a lot. You've written books. You've published pretty much everything you've investigated yourself. And that's the way it used to be, whether it was Scott Rogo or if it was Jerry Clark or Keel or whoever it was, everything they researched, for the most part, they wrote about it at some point. So it's there for posterity. We can go back and we can look at it. If something takes place in that same town or that same location 5 years from now, 10 years from now, how many people that are living in that area now at that time are even going to know who Howard Menger was?
Yeah. By the way, I've
They're
met
not going to
Raymond
know.
Keller. I've met Raymond Keller. He lives up in
Oh, okay.
Virginia. He came down to.
Did you meet Aura Rhymes? That's more important.
Oh no, no, I didn't.
He used to go to conferences with Aura Rhymes or Aura Rames.
All right.
Um, the one
Yeah.
from Orthon, you know Orthon,
Uh-huh.
and
Yeah.
uh,
Damsky's Worth
Laura
Law.
Aura,
Yeah.
and she would wear this little cap and she climbed, and then I think they discovered that she was actually someone named Leslie something. I don't know. I read all this stuff. It might have been Greg Bishop or someone else talking about her, and I thought, okay, well she's long gone, and then all of a sudden Keller comes back, and he has pictures of him with Laura Raines, and I'm saying this is the same woman that we're talking about from back in the 50s.
Yeah. I'm. Yes.
I don't know. It was kind
Some
of
of the stories
crazy.
where he's inserted himself into it, I'm not sure what to think. But I will say that he has a
Me
lot of
neither.
material. When you meet him, he carries around all these papers and it's stuff that came out of Gray Barker's archives. He lives in West Virginia, so he's visited the is Clarksburg
Oh,
uh,
where
library
the archives are kept at the
where
library?
all of Gray Barker's
Yeah,
old
yeah, yeah.
yeah, and so he's made copies and
Yeah,
copies.
have been archived. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I figured that's where he got it from. And again, that goes back to, doing research where you have to actually go to a library. And I remember back in the day wanting to find out certain things that were published in the Newark Evening News, which came out of Newark, New Jersey, and I had to go down there and sit and go through microfiche and then pay like
Hmm.
5 cents or 10 cents, right, to have it. Well, a lot of that is still not available. Like I belong to newspapers.com, which is a great resource, by the way, but it's kind of expensive, monthly charge. But you have access to quite a large number of newspapers throughout the country, and they're always adding more, but a lot of them are not there. You still would have to go to the library and do the grueling work of actually going through all the microfiche in order to find something if you're looking for a particular article that was published at a certain date, or if it's an obscure newspaper or a little newspaper, you know, it's not
Hmm.
online. So, you know, I never realized I probably should have taken a trip down and visited the library and, and I would have found this myself. But,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah,
it gets
I remember
past you. But
the
I always,
I remember the early days as a teenager of the microfiche and going to my local library as well as local newspaper office, Kennebec Journal, to look at their issues going back to 1909 to find airship reports and things in 1947. And
Right,
I
right.
remember 1969, family took a trip to Miami, Florida. So I went to the Miami Herald and scrolled through
Oh, wow.
wherever I had an opportunity, to check the microfiche. But and there
Of
was some
course.
interesting
Of course.
stories. I mean, who knew until I did the research that people in Augusta, Maine, back I think it was December 1909. Oh, excuse me. Um, Claimed that they had seen an airship then. Um, there's still probably a lot of those old cases we still hadn't discovered, but there's been a lot of research that people.
Yeah, and again, uh, with stories like that, if we look back at the airship history, I mean, I would say probably a huge percentage of those were stories that simply were newspapers trying to drum up more business for their newspapers. Um, as newspapers will often do, and certainly did back then when it was so competitive. So you have two local newspapers vying for attention for a headline, and so it's copycat phenomenon. They start doing pretty much the same thing and putting out articles that are of dubious, sourcing, dubious, uh, and unvetted at all, and just publishing everything that reported at the time. But then amongst that, as Fortean phenomena tends to do, Fortean phenomena loves to enfold itself, right, within the folds of those things that are dubious and inauthentic and unreal, as it were, are those things that are actually real. And that is the hallmark of Hortian phenomenon. That's just the
Mhm,
hallmark of it.
mhm,
So, you'll have real UFOs, and we've discussed this, where you have, Gulf breeze, some of them probably very dubious, probably faked, right? And then others in the same general area around the same general time seem to be, some of them seem to be reliable, don't seem to be fakes. So what does one do with that? What is the equation? What is what are we what is being expressed? To me, all we can say about those things is what's being expressed is um, some law or some sort of, um, I don't even know what we would call it, but it's not an ideology necessarily. It can lead to an ideology or set of beliefs or whatever,
or, or modern
but
modern
it
mythos.
just is part. I think it's, yeah, or the trickster motif is probably to me the simplest, and I know that doesn't explain everything, but I think it's probably the most powerful thing that I see represented in my own life, in my own research, and the research of so many other people is the trickster. You know, that's why another great book is George Hansen's book, The Trickster, which is an encyclopedic book and a very, very dense, at times rather uh, daunting read. It
Hmm.
gets really deep in the weeds. But there's a lot expressed there about UFOs and Bud Hopkins and belief systems and all of that, and how the trickster just comes in and just discredits everything and makes things extremely difficult, if not impossible, to sort one thing out from the other. And it's, where do we end up? We end up in this uncomfortable middle spot, right? Where we're torn between this debunking or discarding or discrediting and full acceptance of something as being real or not. And so that's what we're always left with, as I say, betwixt and between, right?
Hmm.
That's what the trickster is. And I can't, and when I read his book for the first time, I said, yeah, after having done this for all these years, probably if I had to point to something I think is most responsible for the frustrations I've experienced in my life as a researcher, it's the damn trickster. And that's
Yeah,
all I can say. That's all I
yeah.
can say. And I think if you look at the Skinwalker Ranch and what's been going on down there and what has been going on from time immemorial, it's not just the Skinwalker Ranch. It's all over, not just Utah, but and I know that
Mm-hmm.
it's all over the place. But it's the same thing, where proof is incredibly elusive, if not impossible, you know.
Yeah, it's hard to
And
separate the wheat from the chaff or the signal from the noise. It's
absolutely. And Bert Schwartz and I used to talk to him and I said, aren't you frustrated by all this? I mean, all these cases? He said, no, on the contrary. He said, I find this very exciting because it's a new area, a new avenue of exploration and so forth. But my feeling always was, well, I hope there's going to be something at the end of this for me. I hope there's light at the end of the tunnel for me where something is illuminated, and I can't say that it's any more or less illuminated than it was when I started.
yes.
Um, so, um, and and that's why I think I stopped and I pulled away from this for a long time, especially after I got done researching, the mutilations. When I got into that period of my life, I was like, okay, I thought this would be fairly easy. I mean, we've got bolts that are being dropped in front of ranch houses. It's a simple yes or no. Is this real or is this not real? Is this due to predation or is this due to ET or is this due to the military or some sort of covert government experiment? Is this possibly part of satanic panic, which was very proliferate back in the 1970s? Is that what this is represented, where people are just paranoid and they think it's a cult? They think it's satanic cults? Is that what these hooded figures are that are often seen in some of these areas where guys walking around with torchlights? Is that what that is? Okay, I'll be happy with any of these explanations as long as I can pin it on somebody. And what happens? I get to the very end of the whole thing. I could pin it on everybody.
Yes.
I
Uh,
could easily pin it on everybody. And as much as I wanted to believe that the helicopters were actual helicopters and that I wanted to believe that that was proof positive, I don't know any longer. And that's not to say that I don't think that some of that, those are real helicopters that were being seen, the mystery helicopters that a lot of people probably are familiar with, or maybe they're not because it's not something, that we experience a lot now. I don't hear a lot about mystery helicopters anymore. I don't know about you. It's not
no, no.
something that's part and parcel of a UFO experience where people used to say, oh my God, I had this happen, that happened. There was a poltergeist, and then you're never going to believe it. I started hearing the whirring of helicopter blades above my house. And, I looked out and there's unmarked helicopters. I took my binoculars and looked at it, and there's no markings. They're supposed to be, and it's got the glass on it that's frosted so you can't see inside. Or worse, I looked out and there's a helicopter, but there's no blades, but it's a helicopter, but I don't hear any sound. How can that be? It's impossible. We don't have helicopters that are completely soundless. And we get into that whole thing, right? So you go back and forth with all of that and you say, well, you know, then what is the purpose of this? But then we have to say, then I have to realize, looking back, I remember when the crop circles came about. Crop circles came about, and then there was a whole flurry of other crop circles, and that gave birth and rise to more elaborate pictographs, right? And then
Mhm.
more experiences of people stepping into the crop circles, and there's this kind of evolution, and then the trickster comes along, and it's these two old dudes, right? And they go, hey, we did all of them, right? And then they show you how they did it, and you go, wow, that's pretty damn good. They did that at night in this. Wow. Wow. Regardless, that's good what they did. I mean, I'm not saying it's the exact same thing that I saw, in some of the ones near Stonehenge or in England or elsewhere, but that was pretty persuasive that they did some of them. Okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. And then people started saying, well, I saw crop circles appeared in front of me, or we'd see a whirlwind, like a vortex coming down, and then the grass would go down like this. And people said, wow, this is like the the fairy rings, back then. Okay, there's a connection there. And then you say, okay, and maybe the vortex is, plasma. And we go through that whole thing, and Terrence Meaden, and you have all these people that step into the fray saying, I think it's related to geophysical. Okay. That's always been a contributing factor for me. The earth forces and all of that always played a role. We know that plays a role. What role? I don't know. Like if you have to come up with a formula, we know that some of the contributing factors are coming from the Earth itself, geomagnetic, because we know where those areas are, the window areas where we have these things proliferated. I don't think that's accidental. That's not coincidental. So we know that that's connected. But then there's other things. There's the personalities, of the people involved. Sometimes we lose sight of that, of who are the people that actually have these experiences. Have they had other experiences? Maybe
Yeah,
they are making their own psychic contribution to it, right?
yeah, and then there's
So
the
if
people who were competing. It came to realize there were different groups of people who were competing to make the most elaborate circles, the best circles, and competing against other people. And
absolutely,
and
and
then
then
and then
and then even more recently,
uh,
this is the most amazing capper to the whole thing is we have people who were faking it, who came forth later to say,
mhm.
well, I didn't want to tell you this, but at the time that we were making the circles and had no interest in this, we didn't believe in any of this crap, right?
Mhm.
These are the debunkers. We started having these weird experiences, the weird feelings of things, and there were all these things that started happening when we would sit inside the circle. I have no idea what that's about. They were like, I don't know. I didn't want to talk about it. Well, of course, you're not going to talk about that if you're trying to debunk it and but isn't that interesting that as you're
Mhm.
trying, and this goes back to what I said to you about very often if we have fraud, I'm interested in the relationship between fraud and hoaxing and things that are actually materializing, okay, that are actually happening. And there's a very strong connection between those two poles. And again, we go back to the trickster. So when one occurs, very often the other one is not far behind,
Yeah, I was just reading
right?
back on some of Keel's stuff too, and I remember might have been in Operation Trojan Horse, but he actually talks about um, like a lot. He found that a lot of the contactees were, he said, being used by the phenomena, and that a lot of these planted evidence was actually the contactees, but they didn't always necessarily realize consciously. He said that they were doing it, but he built
Mm-hmm.
up, he built up that scenario, and in his I'm not saying not all knew what they didn't know what they were doing, but he kind of worked on an idea that some of them were actually, and there was the synchronicity involved with some of these people that he was experiencing with, like out on Long Island and such, that indicated to him that they were being used. In fact, somebody wrote to him one time and said that we are being used. He used that phrase, I think, and Keel felt that. Of course, he made a comment that more than once that a lot of people really frowned upon, of course, as researchers, and that was he found himself more as a demonologist than a UFO researcher, and a lot of people, thought, oh, that's too wild, but he had all these elements, and he felt it was always to he even said used the phrase once, psychological warfare. We're always planting evidence that was going to try to damage the the believers are going to believe, but the people, the general public, would kind of look at it and say, well, it's not proven yet. It's kind of, the skeptics would arm them with ammunition against these ideas. Um,
Yeah. Yeah,
and
absolutely, absolutely,
I re-
and that's the nuance that I I think is often missed by even researchers now or people that I listen to on YouTube or some of these other podcasts or whatever, is the subtlety of it and the fact um, that if you the danger I think is in taking things at face value and looking at it as face value and not
yeah.
understanding it, um, that it might be metaphorical or so forth. I'm particularly thinking about, for example, my immersion um, uh, immersion in the Fortean field actually began, I think, we talked about this with paranormal phenomenon, but mostly ghost phenomenon. I mean, that's really what started me off, was researching ghosts and poltergeists and all of that kind of thing. And especially mediums. So did a lot of research into that in the historical cases, going back to the Victorian ages and so forth and so on. And I read all the accounts written by all the parapsychologists on all the researches that they had done with some of the greatest mediums of their day, many of whom were were able to unmask as being frauds, but
Mhm.
some of whom engaged in fraud, but also uh, manifested other phenomenon that many of those who were there studying it felt was actually genuine. So again, betwixt and between, where the phenomenon seems to have a counter argument to itself. Okay. In other
Mhm.
words, I'm here, but this is being done by fraud. Okay. Somebody's concealing something, like in a dress, they would have something, or they they would conceal something under a table. This would be the sitter, the medium. Um, but in other cases where the hands are tied and there's no way they could be doing it, the same kind of phenomenon starts to happen, right? So it's the phenomenon saying, look, I can do it two ways. She can do it on her own because she's frustrated and nothing's happening. And so she can do it through legerdemain or fraud, or I can do it myself. I can show you how it can be done, and it'll look like the same thing and you won't be able to tell the two apart. So no one will believe it. Now,
Yeah.
who this person, I'm not, when I'm saying, I'm not saying this is a person out there doing it, or a demon or any of that. I don't know what this is, but all I do know is this element, this force takes place and makes these things happen. And I remember reading when Russell Targ and Harold Prodoff were researching Uri Geller, for example. There were things where it seemed like maybe he was using a Confederate, I think his name was Shrippy, was his Israeli friend, and he was always present during the experiments they were doing. And they thought, well, maybe he was relaying certain information to him, so he wasn't really getting it, in a paranormal way. He was just getting it through this communication, through eye movements or whatever. I forget exactly what it was all about, but there was always discussion that maybe some of this is Geller would resort to fraud. And I heard this from other researchers, that were some things that when Geller wasn't able to perform on demand, that he would resort to fraud because he was a magician when he started. Okay.
Mhm.
So, and I remember having a conversation with Scott Rogo. Scott Rogo had him, I think, in his house, and things were happening, and he felt that some of it was being done by fraud. And then all of a sudden something happened. I forget what it was, something like a cupboard flew open, something flew out, or something crashed. And he thought there was no way, he was nowhere near where this was.
Right.
How did he do that? So there's always, the two elements often go hand in hand, especially when you're dealing with whether it's a poltergeist focus, whether it's the person that's at the center of this poltergeist storm that's going on, where when the limelight is off that person or their natural abilities begin to wane, they often will resort to fraud in order to compensate. Okay. Um, and that certainly is not a mainstream psychological explanation. That doesn't wash with anyone. That's not going to wash with anyone in
Mhm.
science. If you say to them, well, we have a new definition of what fraud is.
Yeah.
Okay. I have a new definition for, they're not going to accept it. If the person, Randy would catch like a poltergeist subject doing something or throwing something and then uh, they would use a camera that they would use surreptitiously so they could capture things, and they would show like the person actually throwing an object, and it wasn't being done through PK or psychokinesis. As far as PsyCop, the Committee for the Investigation of Claims Paranormal, that Randy represented, or any of them, the entire case, therefore, is discredited. Even though we have many other instances where William Roll was present and actually saw things that in no way could have been done in that way, where the person is secured and there's no way that they would be able to actually throw objects or do it in that particular way. But there obviously were cases or incidences in which that was being done. And I've had similar experiences with similar poltergeist cases where some of it clearly to me was fraud, clearly. And then there were others where absolutely there's simply no way that it was fraud. So what do we do in the end with that? Doesn't make a very interesting journal article, does it? If you're saying one thing and you're saying, well, both things are true. How can both things be true at the same time? It's like saying Bigfoot is physical, blood and guts creature. But on the other hand, yes, a lot of times, the footprints end and then he just dematerializes. Yes, both things are true. You just have to believe me.
Yeah, and I remember someone pointing
What
out
are we?
to the Stanford team that Geller uh, had a tendency to hoax some things, and the response from someone in Stanford was, "Yeah, we know that. He made a clumsy attempt one time, but there are other things that did happen in his presence that there was no possibility that there was fraud involved." And so they were separating in their own way the wheat from the chaff there.
Yeah, because again, um, it's the old Carl Sagan thing of extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof. So if you're going to be that rigid, and I understand it to some extent, I understand that to some extent,
Mhm.
because we have to say to ourselves, well, if there's fraud that's being detected, then um, why would you continue researching it? If you're researching someone and they did it once, why wouldn't you just assume they're going to continue to do it all the time? If you're a scientist outside of this field and you're looking in and that happens, I understand that would be the natural reaction would be, well, especially if it's uncomfortable, if you have an a priori bias against even the possibility of paranormal phenomena or anything, you're looking for an out. You're looking for a way out of that argument, right? So the easiest way argument is to find a scintilla of proof that there was one element of fraud. If you find one, that's all you need. And so now for the parapsychologist, the researcher who understands the dynamics of how this seems to progress and always has progressed, and it's always been this way, they're willing to accept some fraud, a certain amount of it, okay, for the sake of being able to see demonstrated something that they regard as authentic. So for them, it's a balance between the two. But again, if you're trying to if you're writing in a peer-reviewed journal and you're writing an article and you're trying to make that postulate work, you're going to have a very hard time. You're going to get a lot of flack for it, and it's understandable how it happens. And this is probably a long way away from talking about things like synchronicity, but it really isn't. So, for example, um, you know, when synchronicity happens to people, and for researchers, it happens a lot, right? It happens to all of us, not just names. Keel talks about it. He talked to me about it. He wrote about it. Same names would appear right in different locations. The location of that particular place was the same location where this other contactee was from, or, there's all of these weird synchronicities. And it's not a case necessarily you're looking for those connections. This is, I think, where people don't understand. Like a skeptic will say, "Well, you're a psychic researcher, so you're always looking for coincidence. You're always looking for that." Okay,
Mhm.
um, I was never somebody who is a numerologist. I thought it was interesting, but it wasn't something that really appealed to me. I was always more interested in something that, I hate to say it, but can prove something solid. I was, you
Sure.
know, so to me, photography or even, like later DNA research or, whatever could be used that's part of the arsenal of what we now have as sophisticated scientific, uh, you know, arsenal. those were the tools that I wanted to use, and that's the direction that I was always heading in. So when researchers would talk about synchronicity, I thought it was very interesting, but I always thought, well, maybe it's because I'm not involved in those kinds of cases, you know. But later, particularly when I got involved in the cattle mutilation phenomenon, everything changed. That whole thing went out the window, and I started experiencing a lot of very strange synchronicities. The very first time, though, before that, so I got involved in the research of mutilations in around, seriously, about 77, 78. Coincidentally, around the same time, I was heavily involved with the Menninger investigation, and I had my one and only close encounter, that I've talked about before. So it was right around that particular time. And it was around 1970, 76, I want to say, that I was introduced to Dr. Schwartz, or heard about Dr. Schwartz, and realized, never knew, he was from New Jersey and that he lived a short distance away from where I lived. And he lived in Montclair, New Jersey, which is I lived in Union at the time. And it was probably about a half hour away. And I thought, wow, I got to contact this guy. And so I didn't know, I forgot who I asked, or somebody had said to me, he's in the phone book. Well, I didn't have a phone book. Oh, by the way, anyone listening who's a lot younger than me, a phone book used to be a big book about the size of an encyclopedia, in which the names of the people that were in your particular location lived, and it gave their address. It was all alphabetized, and you had to go through a phone book, believe it or not, in order to find something. Okay, so not being from Essex County, I didn't have, I had to call the operator, right, and get the phone number. I can't even believe, I have a hard time even saying this because it's so now out of my, it's off my radar. I don't, it kind of went down the tube along with the rotary dial phone, but I remember calling and asking for the phone number for Dr. Bertolt Schwartz. I spelled it. Let me explain why I spelled it, because typically when people hear the word Schwartz, they often think there's one spelling, that it's Schwartz. Dr. Schwartz actually isn't Schwartz, but people refer to him as Schwartz. They put a T there.
Yes.
And so I spelled it correctly because figuring I don't want it to be confused. Not that there's another Dr. Bertolt, right, in Montclair. So she gives me a phone number. Okay, I write it down and I dial the number. Okay, and an answering machine comes on. You have reached the office of Dr. Bertolt Schwartz, blah, blah, blah. I'm thinking, well, that's strange. So this is in the afternoon, and I'm thinking, okay, maybe he's with the patient, but I would assume, I knew nothing about him at the time, what his situation was there, but I assumed that he had a secretary, right? Or somebody in the reception area that would pick up calls or get messages in case it's important, because this is a psychiatrist, right? For all you know, I'm going off the deep end. I'm going to jump off my roof and I need immediate medication. So I leave a message on this answering machine to call me back, right? So I don't get a call, and it was about a day or so later, and I think I had talked to my friend Gary Mann and said, oh, I tried to, he knew Dr. Mann. He knew Dr. Schwartz. And I said, I called and I got the number. I called him. I said, I got an answering machine. He goes, oh, didn't so-and-so pick up? Didn't you talk to, I guess it was I don't know if it was his wife or his secretary. It's been so many years. I don't remember what he said, but it was something that I said, no, I left something on the machine. He goes, he had the machine on? Was this after hours? I said, no, it just called in the afternoon, Liz. Oh, that's strange. Okay. You sure you had the right number? I go, well, unless there's another Dr. Bertolt Schwartz, I'm in Montclair. I spelled the name correctly, so I don't know. So he says, well, I think I have his number. So he gets his number, he gives it to me, and it's a different number.
Oh.
So I thought, okay. So I called that number and I got a secretary who said he was in a consultation or whatever, and she would have him call me back. So I leave my number again. And again, this is in the afternoon. I don't get a call, but later that night after hours, I'm home and I live at home at the time with my parents, and my mother happened to pick up the phone, rang, she picked it up. She yells down to me down in the basement where I was, and she said, "Oh, he's Dr. Bertolt Schwartz calling you back." I think my mother was starting to wonder, oh God, I hope he's okay. So I go downstairs and we had an old black rotary dial phone, one of those old, sat on this little carousel. Just funny, the heaviest thing I ever felt in my life. Anyway, I pick it up, Dr. Schwartz. Hey, Peter, it's Dr. Bertolt. I was so excited. I said, thanks for calling me back. Yeah. And so we get acquainted with one another. He starts talking to me about New Jersey. He said, oh, I didn't know. I was just, are you friendly with Gary Mann? I said, yeah, I've made his acquaintance. I think I was at a conference with him, some UFO conference. And so I start getting connected to some of the people that he knows. And that leads to this conversation about his involvement with Howard Menscher. And I had read UFO Dynamics. I think that's what led me to this. It was the UFO Dynamics book that I read. Okay. Or it might have been an article. I'm not sure when the UFO Dynamics book came out. This was like 76, 77. I don't know when he wrote. I'd have to look back. But in any event, he starts talking to me about that, about New Jersey and some of the things that happened, so forth and so on. We are into the conversation for about 10 minutes or so. And all of a sudden, the operator, it's hard for me to even say this. This is so bizarre. The operator comes onto the call. You remember when they used to do that? They would, if there was an emergency, the operator, a lot of people aren't going to know this because this wouldn't happen now. You just call you just dial on your iPhone, right? 911. But the operator came on and she said, hello. She said, this is the operator. I have an emergency call for Peter Jordan. And I would say, now my parents are home and I'm thinking, well, who could this be about? I'm thinking, maybe I had a girlfriend at the time who lived in Montclair. And I thought, well, maybe something happened to my girlfriend. So I said, oh, and I said, oh, okay. And I said, can I ask who's calling? And she said, it's Dr. Bertolt Schwartz. You could have heard a pin drop. So this is the most interesting point of all. I am just like flabbergasted, it's bizarre. I'm thinking, okay, somebody know that I was going to be talking to Bert. And so they actually got an operator to come in. This is how my mind works. Right? I'm trying to find some rational explanation for how did this happen? Right? Bert says, can you please ask him what his middle initial is? Which I thought, what the hell? That's a weird thing to say. And with that, she clicks off. So Bert says, Peter, hold on. I have to take dictation on this. So he gets a pad and he's writing down what happened. He said, my goodness, I've had so many of these over the years. And if you read, I don't know if it's in UFO Dynamics, might have been in this other little book that he wrote about. It's called Psychiatric Study of Paranormal or of psychic people or whatever. And in there, I think he talks at length about some of the experiences he had with the phone system where people break in and all these kinds of things that happened with his phone. Okay. And when he was researching Betty Hill, when Betty Hill was at the house, he wrote I don't know if you ever remember this, all these things that happened with her. He wrote a 2-page article. I'm glad we're talk about a footnote. Here's a footnote. He wrote a 2-page article in FSR about Betty Hill's psychic background, all the things that happened to Betty Hill prior to that. And it was a 2-part article in FSR. And he sent me 2, I still have them stapled copies of these articles. Did you ever read these?
I think it, excuse me, I think it's in UFO Dynamics. There was one with Betty Hill and let's see. Well, there was, yeah, there may be 2 different ones I'm thinking of. There was a picture of Betty Hill and Mary
Marianne.
Cassio.
Yes, that's what I'm talking in part about that. But anyway, so he had this history of things that happened. I didn't have any such history, obviously, with this type of thing. And so I was kind of flabbergasted. And he took these notes, he stopped and he goes, okay, so where were we? Like it was nothing. And we went on talking about whatever we were talking about. And so there, that was the end of that. And I talked about it to other people. I talked about it to the people in the field, and they said, "Oh, it sounds like it was like a doppelganger. Or, it sounds like something Keel would have experienced, or you know, it's that's such a Fortean thing." And I said, "Yeah, I guess." I said, "But is it possible, since he was having all these experiences in his office, that his phone was bugged? Is it possible?" I thought, and I still think to this day, is it possible? You know, CIA or someone is actually, and then they're playing games, you know, they're doing things like this. I don't know. It's kind of far-fetched to think that, because again, you would have to know that he's calling me at that moment, right? Okay, so they tap his phone and they know he's making the call, fine. But then you have to arrange to have somebody, right, who sounds like an operator, you know, break into the line and do that. But you know, hey, it could happen, I suppose. So
it would have been
let me
interesting
just,
if it would have been interesting if you'd just gone ahead and accepted the call with the real Dr. Schwartz on there and seen what happened next, you know. But it's still very, very curious, certainly. But
so here's the thing though that I wanted to point out to you, and I think I might have sent this to you, but what I never realized was that so I never told Bert about the fact that I had made a call to someone I thought was that I know identified as Dr. Bertold Schwartz on a answering machine, you know, and then discovered that was the wrong number and this is the correct number. So for a long time, I thought about that. I thought, well, isn't it also strange that I was calling somebody I thought was Dr. Schwartz? I was given a number of somebody in Montclair, presumably named Dr. Bertold Schwartz with that spelling at a number. Okay. And then I find out who the number is for the real Dr. Schwartz. I contact him. And during that phone call, wouldn't you know that I'm getting a return call? That's what she said. She said, the operator said, it's an emergency call for Peter Jordan. I said, who's it from? It's an emergency call from Dr. Bertold Schwartz. And I don't believe she said he's returning your call. But when I thought about it, I thought, well, if he's calling me back, right? He's calling me back. See, I'm trying to tease this whole thing out. I'm trying to make sense of it. And of course I didn't. So anyway, long story short, years later, I don't know why I was on when I joined up with Ancestry.com and I started being able to Google people and their history and all thing. I said, oh, I never dug into Bert Schwartz's history. You know, I never really dug into who he was. So I go into Ancestry and now I get his whole genealogy, right? And it's quite an interesting, it's fascinating genealogy. I mean, the man is just absolutely amazing. But his father lived in Montclair for a long time. From 1924, he had his own practice there. From 1924, and he died in 2010 in Vero Beach. No, hold on, sorry. let me see if I can, I just got to share this with you because it's really quite fascinating. Okay, so his father, Dr. Bertold Theodor D. Schwartz, um, had his own practice. He was a medical doctor. He was born in 1899, but he died in 1969. But he lived very, very close to where Bert Schwartz lived. I often wondered, why would Bert ask such a stupid question of what is his middle name or initial to the operator? Did Bert think it was possible that this was his father? And I'll leave it at that. I have no idea.
Well, of course, he was in touch with D. Scott Rogo, and Rogo wrote the book Phone Calls from the Dead, and Keel actually
Right.
and Dr. Schwartz actually submitted some material to that book, like Jerry Wilhelm up in Fairfield, Ohio,
Yes,
with
I remember that. I remember that.
so
Yes.
so it's
He
quite
also, he also, when this happened, he was completely nonplussed about it. Now I know he had a lot of experiences. He had a lot of things that happened. Most of which he published. I don't know if he published everything, but
mhm.
this was probably one of many different weird things that had happened to him in his lifetime, and he didn't think anything of it. But the question he posed, I thought was interesting.
Yeah, and
And
also
I never bothered to ask him, why did you want to know what his middle name is? Because I'm thinking, what difference would it make? What? There's two Bertold Schwartzes in Montclair?
yeah, and by the way, the UFO Dynamics would have been published, I think, in 1983. So
No, 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 no. Then I must have made this discovery about him in another way. And it might have been an
see,
article.
in 76, 77, he would have been writing for Flying Saucer Review, and a lot of that material,
Yeah, and that I subscribe to. So yeah, that's probably the source
yeah.
of where that was. But I thought you would find that kind of interesting.
Oh,
That
yeah.
was that was just so strange. That was so strange. And especially all these years, I thought, and also, by the way, when I ran on ancestry.com, I didn't stop here. I said, is it possible there was another Bertold Schwartz with a T or a Bertold Schwartz with just spelled exactly as Bert Schwartz spelled his name that was in Montclair at the time, doctor or not. So I went through the entire list, and the only thing that kept coming up was either Bert himself or his father, who had been long dead. Those were the only two Schwartzes, Bert Schwartzes, in
Huh.
Montclair. Figure that one out. I have no idea. Isn't that
Yeah.
strange?
Yeah, it is.
So, um, so then, so then, about a couple of years ago, I'm digging through my old files, and I said, because I always thought, oh, too bad I don't have the old phone number. I would love to check that number, the one I called originally.
Yeah.
Okay. So I found a red book that I had, and it had all these old addresses. It has your old address and your phone number and Scott Rogo and Jeffrey Mishlove. And I go, and there's Bert Schwartz, and there's a phone number that's crossed out,
Ah.
and there's Bert's number, which I knew was his active number for many years. So I look at the old number, but the problem is it it has an area code which is no longer, I still have to work on this because it has an old area code that doesn't represent, I don't think, where this is. So when I looked at what that area code might be, it's for some remote town because the area codes have all changed in these locations.
Oh, okay.
So I still have the number,
Mhm.
but I don't know what that number was for. But
Hmm.
it's very, very strange. Um, but that was my first, and at that point, isolated incident, rather dramatic, I have to say. That was pretty dramatic
Hmm.
of that, you know, and and then cut to 1970, around 78. I start reading, I start really getting into UFOs. Because I think it was the Walton case, my UFO experience, which came off of my reading of Bill Barry's book, the UFO encounter, which I still have. I just reread it, by the way, because I was looking at more of my looks, and in there I had stuck the piece of paper on which I had actually written the time that my event was happening with a picture, which I was writing at the time that I actually had the experience. I wanted to make sure I wasn't paralyzed. I wasn't having sleep paralysis. I wanted to prove to myself that I was awake, and I was awake enough that I could actually make a note, which I then inserted in the book, the Travis Walton book, which had come out by Bill Barry. And I think this was like 1978 that book came out, because I had just gotten it and I read it. And that book caused me all kinds of problems, because I thought, I don't know if that happened, but I know what happened to me happened, and maybe what is happening now is to cause me to reflect upon what it's like when you actually experience something that you think is possibly not real. For my own education.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know. Was it that? I don't know. But
yeah.
Yeah.
That's where you wonder if
so,
the trick is teacher of sorts,
Yeah, well, that's it. And a lot of it, I think, is educational. I think a lot of it is to show us new possibilities, new ways of perceiving the world, to open up our boundaries, to unlock certain things that maybe we've kept locked or repressed, that maybe we, for our own self-preservation and survival, we feel we need to keep locked and suppressed, but which maybe we're being taught we should let go, and not try to be so controlling. That's my personality. See, my personality tends to be, because it's more of a scientific approach to things, of being analytical, of overanalyzing my own emotions, overanalyzing other people's emotions. That's the psychologist part of me. Sometimes that gets in the way, of experiencing life the way it's supposed to be. But also fear. I think fear plays a big role in not wanting to open up too much. I know that's true for me. That I never, even when I had when I had that experience, I was absolutely petrified. I never thought I would be that petrified. And it was interesting.
Yeah.
I already knew that these things happened. And I thought, how can I be so sure that these are real, that people are actually being abducted or they're having these experiences? How can I be so sure when I've never had the experience myself? I have nothing, I have no template for this. I have no way to orient myself psychologically or to relate to this. And then when I had the experience, even though I was prepared for it in the way that someone might be prepared because you've read so much about it, you're, well, how bad could this be? Wow. You think, holy mackerel, there's the light, when you see, all those years of reading stories where people said the light lit up an entire forest and it was like it was lit up by sunlight. And I used to always remember reading that and picturing that in my mind, thinking, yeah, okay, I'm sure that happened. Who would make that up? Why would you say I'm in this dark, scary woods and all of a sudden the whole place becomes illuminated by something as bright as the sun? Why would you make that up? That's crazy. That probably happened, and enough times people have experienced that. Well, when I saw that and I could see the veins in the leaves on the trees, I thought, oh my God, what kind of light is able to do that? But I was petrified by that. And I wasn't abducted, as far as I know. I didn't have anything else happen. I didn't find myself paralyzed. I think that would have really freaked me out, And I remember my good friend Ron Mangervite, who was one of the psychics that I had worked with for years and years in poltergeist cases and all kinds of things. He was a member of Mensa. He was a biologist. He was one of the first researchers into interferon. He worked at Bell Labs. He was absolutely one of the most brilliant people I knew, but also one of the most incredible psychics I ever worked with. And he was so rational, but then he would go into this zone and he would just tell you things, but a lot of it was related to chakras and things having to do with the biological system. He would give me readouts of people's bodies and all kinds of things, and he was just amazing. And I remember right after this experience meeting up with him and saying I had this experience, and he said, did you write it down? I go, yeah, I wrote it down. I had a piece of paper. I said, let me touch it. Let me see what happened. So he touches it. He closes his eyes and he goes, wow. And he said, you just wouldn't come out of your body. I go, what do you mean? He goes, whatever this was using something to get you to come out of your body. But in some way, even though you were asleep, you were conscious that something was going on and you shut it down. And you were so resistant because he said, I'm seeing the chakra blocked at your lower spine. And they were trying to get that to go up into your head so you could come out.
Hmm.
And talk about being petrified. I said, thanks for that reassuring word. You know, holy mackerel. Seriously? He goes, I'm just telling you, that's what I think happened. But he goes, you're blocked, which actually helped you in this regard.
Yeah.
So he used to take his hand, he would put it in my back and he would run it up and down like that. And I would feel a jolt of electricity going from the top of my head all the way down. And I would actually turn around and I would say, what are you doing? He goes, I'm not even touching you. My hand is right here. I'm not doing anything. He goes, I'm just looking at your chakra. He goes, you're blocked here. You're blocked at this chakra. And he goes, and so you're not able, there's times when you're traveling. Do you travel at night? Do you? I go. I travel. I have flying dreams. He goes, yeah, you're traveling. You don't want to admit that you're doing it. You're having astral travel. You're disguising it as flying. You're not flying. You're coming out of your body, but you're only coming out partially. He goes, do you find sometimes it's hard to get through a wall or that it's hard to travel? And all of a sudden I got a chill. I said, I had never said anything to him about this. I said, that's very weird. I said, here's what happens to me. When I'm in the dream, I have lucid dreams, and very often I talk to the people around me and I say, I can't believe that you people don't realize that we're out of our body, we're traveling, right? I would tell them that and they would laugh, or they would say, you're crazy. I'm not out of my body. I go, well, you are, but you're in denial. I'm also partly in denial, and that's why I have a hard time traveling. I can fly, and then all of a sudden I find it gets real sludgy. Like if I want to go through a wall, I have to push really hard. I used to all the time when I was a child, I had these constantly. And I used to think they're nightmares. And then I realized, because I used to watch horror movies so much, I was scared all the time as a kid when I have dreams. I had a lot of nightmares, you know. But what I learned to do is I could change the dream. So if a creature's coming after me or some sort of monster, I would just look at it and will it to turn into a butterfly, whatever, and it would just transform like that. It was like magical thinking.
Nice.
I thought, this is great. I really like this. Somebody would be coming at me with a knife and I would say, I don't want to be here. And I would feel the knife go in and then I'd say, shut it off. And there would be no pain. And next thing you know, I'm back in bed. But I never felt like I'm falling from a height or that I'm coming back into a body or autoscopy where I can actually see my body. But Ron Mangrovite said to me, yeah, you're not willing to let go. You're trying to control it. And what's happening is he goes, this could have been alien. They reached out to you to test you and realized you're not suitable. So he said, I wouldn't worry about it. They're not coming back. And I didn't know what to make of that. I didn't know what to make of that. I still don't know what to make of that.
Yeah, interesting.
And then I'm with another sensitive that I worked with many years who worked with the police down in South Jersey, Elizabeth Lerner, who died some years ago. She was absolutely amazing. And I'm sitting with her, same thing. I take the piece of paper and I said, and again, I made no mention that I'd had another psychic or sensitive look at it. I said, what do you think this was? And she touches it like this. And the minute she touches it, she goes, who works for Bell Labs that you know? That was Ron Mangrovite.
Huh.
And I said, well, I know somebody. And she goes, Bell Labs, where's Telegraph Hill? And I go, Telegraph Hill? She goes, I said, California? She goes, no, New Jersey. Bell Labs. I see a sign. Telegraph Hill. If you take the road up, it goes to the top. There's a lot of top secret stuff that they work on. Somebody knows about your interest in whatever you're involved in. She said, whatever cases you're involved in, and they want to keep tabs on you, but they also want to see how you react to what they're going to do. So she said, so now what I'm seeing is, what does this mean? Triangulation. And I get the word argon. What's argon mean? I see somebody, she said, I want to see that he's in a caterpillar. It's almost like a tractor, but it's movable. You can move it around. Is there a woods in back of where this happened, where you were? Yes. Somebody came into the woods and they're able to actually triangulate lights, laser lights. She said in such a way that there would be a beam that would come in the room at you. Wow.
Wow.
Interesting.
Yeah.
She said, this is meant to scare you, but also to make you to believe that it's something from the alien, and they're hoping you're going to write about it in that way.
Wow.
Talk about being conflicted. Talk about the trickster.
Yeah.
Here I have two sensitives, both of whom I respect tremendously, that I've worked with years. One is telling me, and this, by the way, Ron Mangervite, whenever I would do UFO stuff with them, I don't think he ever said that's alien. It wasn't like in his wheelhouse. He always looked for other things that were real. So if there was anybody who would say that it was something military or whatever, it should have been him, but it wasn't. I found it interesting though. So after that, I start looking for Bell Labs, and there was a Bell Labs in Homedale, New Jersey, down the shore. So I took a drive down there. And don't you know, just before you got to the exit, there was a little sign. It said Telegraph Hill.
Wow.
Now, that I've been on that road a million times. I never saw this little sign. And there was a private road on the side that ran up to the top. So later I checked into this and I found out that that's where they did a lot of research on lasers and things of that sort. So I don't know. You tell me. I have no idea. I mean, did that exist back then? The technology to be able to take something remotely, right? And as she said, triangulate lights in such a way to create a beam of light that would come in. It doesn't account for everything, though. It doesn't account for the fact that, as I explained, my mother, who normally is the lightest in the world, was a short distance away down the hallway. Even with me screaming at the top of my lungs, never woke up. So there's that aspect of it where we have someone shut off, so that plays in your mind, oh, she's being shut off. Well, how did they do that? Right.
And
this isn't being done now. This is being done in 1978. Yeah. So I'm laying that out because I never talked about that in the last time we spoke. I wanted to make it clear. I don't know. I don't know anything. Okay. Don't come to me for answers. I don't know. If these things start happening to you and you have all these different aspects, after a while, you just say, okay, stop struggling with this and just accept it for what it is. Whatever it means. I don't know what it means. Whatever it is, it hasn't been revealed to me. It never happened again. Never had that experience again. Now, did it not happen again because I was, as Ron said, shut off, and so I wasn't receptive to it? Or was it something that was manufactured by some agency in order to get me onto the same wavelength, of everybody else, believing that these are alien visitations, and then I would publish that and, of course, maybe be ridiculed or discredited completely for anything else that I would say thereafter, right?
Yeah. The tricks, as Spock would say on Star Trek, fascinating, but what is it?
Yeah. So then, we go from there to me reading articles on the cattle mutilations. I think that's my first exposure to that was Saga UFO magazine. There was a couple of articles on the cattle mutilations that were taking place in Dulce, New Mexico. One was actually,
yeah, actually, we're.
Do you have to go?
Yeah, it's that time. We are gonna have
Okay,
to we're gonna have to pick up where we left off because I know if
that's
you're gonna
That's all
talk,
right.
but we completed the
Well, we got through the whole synchronicity thing and some of these
yeah,
other little elements. And
and it's absolutely, as I said, fascinating. I don't know what to make of all that either, but certainly there's a lot of things that are just like beyond conventional coincidence, and
oh,
it's
absolutely, absolutely,
yeah,
not
it's
coincidental in any way whatsoever. And it's just amazing how you can be confronted by something so physical, like I was with the light, but yet
mhm.
there's an endless array of different possibilities of what something can be, whether I'm trying to interpret it or I'm allowing other people with supposedly, uh, uh, you know, paranormal abilities in order to actually perceive what it is, and how disparate those perceptions can be. That's really also fascinating too.
Yeah,
You know.
absolutely, absolutely. And I find these interviews we're doing just really, really intriguing. The areas that you touch upon, and the years that you spend in the field, and all of that is still right there in the forefront of your frontal lobe.
Well,
I
you
mean,
know what it is. Some things just never leave you. I think, especially a person when you have personal experiences like that, and especially since I've had so few of them of that nature. You know,
mhm.
you know, like the Bert Schwartz thing. I never had another incident like. I never had anything like that happen with
Wow.
phones. I didn't have what Keel had with the clicking and the beeping and all that. I mean, someone like that, I understand. The CIA, they were, of course, in the '60s especially. I mean, they were everywhere, and they're looking into
And,
that stuff.
yeah, and of course, Gray Barker.
Well,
Lord.
then you have the tricksters. That's what we talked about.
Yeah.
Tricksters are never far away. So if you don't have the trickster element, the force itself of the trickster working on you, you have real flesh and blood tricksters behaving as representatives of the trickster. Acting as the emissaries. So you had Mosley, um, who's probably even worse than Barker. I think. Just
And
really bad, just really, really bad.
yeah,
Um, but it's absolutely fascinating.
yeah.
Fascinating and frightening. I can't even imagine what it was like for Keel back in the '60s with him being fed all this information that at the time he was completely sold on, the Princess Owl Moon and the whole thing happening out in Mount Misery and all of that stuff that was going on out there. I mean, when I read back all those letters, and he was completely taken over by that. When he talks about how they're taken over, this is the danger. He didn't heed his own warnings, which he always made about belief. You know,
Hmm.
Keel got taken in by all of that. The one thing about myself, I always pulled myself off. If things got crazy, I didn't allow it for long to affect my belief system. I would take myself out of it, and I would deliberately put myself into another frame of reference about it. That was my shut off valve. I'd go elsewhere. I'd travel to this other frame of reference as like almost like a debunker, and I'd say, let's look at this in a totally different way. And I think a lot of that's protective, but I think it's also healthy. So if you keep moving from here to here to here, kind of like we talked about him, but um, the one that writes all the books, but he doesn't have a pony in the race. He
Oh,
just
oh, Nick
gives
Redford.
Nick Redfern. So
Yeah.
people like Nick Redfern stay healthy. They stay healthy through the whole experience. Keel didn't for a long time. I remember at one point he was talking to Lauren Coleman about getting gas masks because it was predicted, I think it was by Princess Al Moon, that there was going to be some sort of, I don't know if it was a nuclear proliferation or something was going to happen, and the only people going to be survive this apocalypse was going to be those that didn't breathe the air, and so so he went and got one of those gas masks, and he was all set, and he
Oh,
had written a letter, and I remember seeing the letter about how crazy he was about that.
yeah.
But you say to yourself, this is what happens if you allow yourself to embrace belief too much, you know?
All right. Well, we've
Well,
got
listen,
definitely
I know you, yeah, you've got other things to do today besides talk to me, but we'll
well,
continue this again, maybe after the holidays. You give it a break for a little while. You've got other people you got to talk to. I got to go back into your, I'm going back to alternate perceptions now, and I'm starting to reread certain things that you know, I used to get it as when you were printed it, when it was
mhm,
printed, and I
yeah.
used to read the whole thing and so forth. What's happened now is I'm so inundated with so many things I want to read and so many things I want to listen to that
Mhm,
sometimes I go, oh, but then you'll remind you, say, yeah, I have that in this, and that's why I went back to the Betty Hill thing or Martin's thing, which I don't ever remember reading, and that was really interesting. That was very interesting what she has to say. I mean, I still don't get it. I still don't understand this whole distinction between so-called medical hypnosis and stage hypnosis. It's hypnosis, and she does say though, she said, but a lot of it is she then goes on and says, but it's contingent upon the experiencer and their set of beliefs, and it's contingent upon, you know, the person performing the hypnosis. I mean, James Harder was notorious for asking leading questions during hypnosis all the time. He was
mhm,
notorious for that. I've
yeah.
read the transcripts. Kevin Randall had a whole thing. Kevin Randall did some cases with him where they went and he would just sit and watch Harder do his thing. Harder wasn't a psychologist. He,
He was an
I didn't
engineer.
know him.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a civil engineer, but he was always asking leading questions. So, you get, garbage in, garbage out. Again, that's separate from, is there a real experience? I think there is, but that's not the way to gain access to it, in
Right.
my view.
Right.
That's not the
And
way to get access.
so many good points and things to think about. Always thought provoking.
We'll get back later. Before I go, I just wanted to ask you about Joan, how she's doing.
Well, she's seen the last therapist, physical therapist last,
Oh, great.
and she's still got a lot of pain, but I think that's pretty much expected with this, that it's gonna take a few months
It
to
takes a
work that
while.
all.
Yeah, yeah. Okay,
It's yeah, but she's coming along. She's moving along. They said
good.
she's doing excellent, really. And she saw a
I wish her
doctor.
well.
Well,
Okay.
appreciate it. Much appreciated.
All right. Well,
All right.
listen, I'll let you go. And then if I don't talk to you, have a great holiday.
All right.
Okay.
You too, Peter. Sure appreciate it. And you take
And
care.
then
And
in touch. Okay.
we'll stay in touch. Certainly.
All
Absolutely.
right. You take care.
All right.
Bye
You
bye.
too, my friend.